This is Amy Berg, and you're watching the TV Writer Podcast.
Hosted by Gray Jones, the TV Writer Podcast is brought to you by Script Magazine and ScriptMag.com, the leading source for script writing information in print and on the web. This is Gray, and I'm here with executive producer and writer Amy Berg. How you doing, Amy?
I'm great. Thanks for coming to my house, which is cool.
Yeah, this is so cool, and I appreciate you having me, and especially because of this amazing background, which has to be the winner of any podcast we've done.
Well, you know, it's my office, so it has to sort of reflect who I am, I think, and I think it does that pretty well.
Oh my goodness. I see Next Generation, I see Firefly, I see Stargate SG-1. Behind the corner, there's a giant Neil Grayston, and
there's a Buffy.
Oh my goodness, there's Buffy.
And there's some Doctor Who as well.
Oh my goodness. Well.
And you know, you can't go anywhere without this guy.
Oh, so cool. So cool. Okay, you got a little mini Comic-Con behind you.
I know, I kind of do.
Yeah. Well, tell me a bit about that. You're a bit of a nerd yourself.
I am, I think a bit is an understatement. I am a huge nerd, and I'm just glad that it's cool now.
Yeah. And actually, it's really, really neat. I mean, I grew up as a nerd myself, and I remember being ostracized because of it.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of cool to be a nerd.
It is. I used to sort of hide the Star Trek The Next Generation novelizations that I was constantly reading when I was in school growing up, but now it's, you know, it's on display in my garage. So, you know, I'm proud. I've always been proud, but now, you know, we're out and proud, which is great. Go nerds.
Very cool. Well, obviously the reason is because people have now recognized it can be profitable.
Oh, it is. It's true. That can be. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in the interview. We're going to split the interview into 4 parts. First part will be sort of how you grew up and got into the business. Second will be taking me through your various experiences in different writing rooms along the way, some of the lessons you've learned. Third part will be advice to writers who are breaking in. And then fourth, we'll be talking about your new web series, Caper.
Yes.
Which I'm sure everybody's going to want to hear. So first of all, you got started here in California. You grew up in California?
Yeah, I grew up in Northern California in a relatively small town in which most of the women became teachers and most of the men became firemen. Or police officers, you know. You know, and I was one of the few that I think ran away and went to film school and wanted something completely different for myself.
And why was that? What made you interested in that at that time?
I was always into telling stories. I was a huge reader growing up. I also had a video camera in the house, and so I got to play around with that a lot and tell stories through that medium. And it sort of made me really want to sort of, I don't know, show the world instead of just experience it where I was from. I wanted to make something a little bigger.
Very cool. And so you got to film school, and where did you go to film school?
I actually went to UC Davis first. I was, you know, it's so far outside of everything that I grew up knowing. My dad's a grocery store manager, and my mom was a homemaker, and I don't have any family in the business, so it really didn't seem like film school was like an option coming out of school. It just didn't seem like a real job. And so I went to UC Davis, and I was sort of a communications and English and liberal arts major. But I had a English professor pull me aside one day and sort of change the course of my life. And she had sort of made me read one of my papers out loud in front of the class, and
wow.
and said like, I'm not sure why you're here. You really shouldn't be here. You should be in film school. You write in a way that is so visual that I feel like you need to find a different outlet in which to express it than just writing essays. And it sort of blew my mind because I never really sort of thought of it as a career choice. I just always sort of just thought it was something fun to do on the side. And I'd even started a film club at UC Davis, which is now a film program. Mm-hmm. But that they didn't have that at the time, so I had to leave and go to film school and to get my education that way.
Wow. And so film school then was?
Film school was San Diego State University, which was the cheapest one I could find since I was leaving a UC system and having to sort of go at it alone a little bit. And it was a great experience. San Diego State is one of those schools where it's kind of guerrilla, where you really need to be in charge of every aspect of productions. You need to know how to do everything. You need to, you can't just go in and want to be a writer or be a director. You have to know how to set up lights. You have to know how to edit. You have to know how to, you have to rent all the equipment yourself. And it's just, you have to have a full breadth of knowledge. And I think when I finally did come out to LA, I felt like I had a strong base of understanding of all aspects, which I think helped me a lot.
Well, and that's a really important point, because I know for a lot of people who are starting out, they kind of get this picture in their mind that, George Lucas graduated from this school and this person came from here. And so if I only had a degree from here, and meanwhile it's $120,000, $140,000 once you paid for everything.
Let's put it this way. I paid off all of my loans by the time I was 25.
Wow.
So I think, and I feel like I learned as much, if not more, from having to do all of those things myself, and for not having all of those things sort of given to me. If I had gone to, the more well-known film schools in Southern California. But I was excited about my education there, and I feel like I came out here with all the tools I needed, to get started.
Very cool. And so your first job.
Yes.
In the industry, what was that?
My first job in the industry was as an assistant on a Nickelodeon television show called All That. And I was straight out of college. I found an ad in the Hollywood Reporter.
Really?
Advertising the assistant position. I had to fill out a 3-page test in which my resourcefulness was put under pressure, and then I went in for 2 different interviews, one with the showrunner and one with the entire writing staff.
To be an assistant.
To be an assistant, yes.
Wow.
It was it was great, because I just assumed that that's how everybody did it, and so my head was on straight from the beginning of it's going to be this hard. That's fine. I'm up for it. Let's do it. So I had no sort of nothing I expected to just come my way. I had to go out and get it. And it was good. It was a great job on a really fun show with some child stars that are super talented, and Keenan's on Saturday Night Live now, and it's just it was a great experience. I learned a lot. I got to be in a writer's room at the age of 22, which was amazing.
Wow.
So I learned a lot, and it was sort of the beginning of my writing career. Unintentionally, in a way, because I had written a spec Buffy my first few months in town, and it was my favorite show, and I just assumed that I should be writing for it because it was just from my voice. So so I wrote this spec, and I showed it to the writers at the Nickelodeon show, and I was like, well, how do I get this to Joss Whedon? And so naturally they laughed at me and said, that's not how it works. Oh, you're very adorable with the rub on the head. And and they explained that, you can't read specs of your own show because there's legal issues and all of that. And so I was like, well, I'll send him something else then. And so I wrote a 1-act play that had myself, Joss Whedon, and the cast of Buffy as characters. Talking about how awesome I was, that it would be a terrible mistake if they didn't meet me. This was nuts. And I had some of the prop guys at Nickelodeon whittle some vampire steaks, and I bought some vampire teeth, and I put all this stuff in the play in a cover letter in a box, and I sent it off to Joss Whedon's office. And 2 days later, I got a call from Joss's assistant saying he wanted to meet me. So here I am, 22 years old. I just been in town a couple months at that time, and my first meeting ever was with Joss Whedon on Buffy.
Oh my goodness.
And so I ended up pitching a bunch of story ideas, and I was in the running, apparently. I didn't know what that meant at the time, because I didn't know there was such thing as staffing season. It just happened to be staffing season. I didn't end up getting the job. It went to, I think it was either Jane Espenson, or I think it was Jane, actually. And which is fine, because holy crap, thank God, because there's so many great episodes of television we have because of that, because of me not getting the job, which is great. But when I went back to my writing staff at Nickelodeon, they wanted to know everything about Joss and what he was like, and And I think they figured that if Joss Whedon wanted to hear my ideas, that maybe they should hear my ideas too.
Okay.
So they asked me to pitch. And so I went in, I pitched some ideas, and they bought a couple, and then they brought me on staff the next season, and that's all because of like, you know, a failed mission to get Joss Whedon's attention, which ended up getting other people's attention, and sort of set sail on my writing career, which was pretty amazing.
And just people who are watching who might not know that's pretty unusual to go so fast.
Yeah, and you know, very ballsy. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that path to people because I think nowadays you'd be considered actually crazy. But for me, it worked. I mean, it was a combination of sort of a lot of drive and naivete. Actually, worked in my favor in that regard. But yeah, it's definitely hard to get in, and unless you can somehow elevate yourself first, even before your talent. It's one of the few ways you can break in these days.
Wow. Okay, so you're on staff for the show. You're pitching and selling ideas. You're writing scripts, and then tell me a little bit about the next few years. You did Kenan and Kel.
Yeah, it was sort of season 5 of all that, and the last season of Kenan and Kel when I showed up in town, and so I got to write for both of those shows, which was a great experience. And for some reason, students seem to be wanting to talk more about those shows than the shows I've actually been doing recently. But I had a great time. I think it was 3 years I was there writing on those shows and on staff, and Kevin Coppola and Heath Seifert were the showrunners, and they are the best guys to learn from. I think I feel like I was spoiled starting out because they're such good humans in addition to being very, very talented. So I got to sort of like soak all of that stuff in. So when I went off and started doing 1 hours, I felt like I had a great sort of, you know, base understanding of everything that was required of a person in a writer's room, and also learned some lessons about, you know, being a good person too from them, which was great. Well,
that is, I mean, that's pretty amazing. I mean, that's kind of a 3-year safe environment.
Yeah.
With good mentors and teachers. That's kind of like a master's program almost.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was really how I was getting my education. But then again, I was still very sheltered because it was all happening in this one environment. Whereas a lot of people have, you know, all these different jobs starting out where they can learn different aspects of the industry. Whereas I was sort of insular and learning just sort of like how how Nickelodeon does things as opposed to how everything else works. And so even when I left there, I was still a little naive about, you know, the business aspects of the business, especially.
Very cool. So I don't know if we have time to talk about every project.
Sure.
But maybe you can just tell me a Reader's Digest of sort of the next 10 years in between then and the 4400. What were some of the signposts along the way?
Well, to make the move to 1 hours, I had written a West Wing spec, and with a friend of mine, Andrew Colville, and we sent that to his bosses at the time. He was an assistant on a show called Boomtown, and we sent that to his bosses, and they brought us on staff on this 1 hour Fox show called North Shore. And while we were staff writers on that show, I had this crazy idea to do a Lost spec. And this was the first season of Lost when they were focusing on individual characters and doing backstories for all of these characters. And I decided I wanted to write a spec from the perspective of the dog.
No.
Yeah, and it turned out really good, and it got the attention of all of the other shows that were essentially ripping off Lost in the following year. So we had all these offers on these different shows, and one of them being Threshold on CBS, which was run by Brandon Braga, so I was on there.
Wow.
And then the 4400 found me when we got canceled, and so I jumped on the 4400, and then I got to work with maybe, you know, my most... I don't know, probably my biggest mentor, which is Ira Stephen Bear, who taught me so much about how to be a writer, on the page especially. And I threw everything I had in a toolbox when I left that show and said, this is what I'm taking away from this. And because he was so great in letting people into the different sides of the process. And even when he would rewrite you, which he would rewrite everybody, but he would want to do it with you. So you would sit down with him side by side and you would go through the script. And there's no way of becoming a better writer than to do it step by step like he did. Because otherwise you're just guessing.
Yeah.
Well, that scene didn't work. I wonder why it didn't work. And then you would just rewrite it in a different way. But it's not, you're not learning from that, but you're sitting next to the master and, the guy who, ran Deep Space Nine, was one of the best, soap operas of all time, basically, is telling you, line for line how to improve something. And I really owe him a lot as to who the writer I am now and what I bring to the table when I come onto a new show.
Wow. And no, that was a pretty small writing staff, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was like 4 or 5, 5 people, I think. Yeah. And he liked to keep it that way. It was very intimate, and we'd all write, it was 13 episode seasons on the 4400, and we'd normally write 2 or 3. And he was there every step of the way. And he also allowed me to do a lot of things on the production side of things, like give notes on cuts, and I did like all of the music spotting for the show when I was a story editor, which is normally an executive producer level. Yeah. So I was placed in high regard, enough high regard anyway, where he allowed me to do things that I would normally not be able to do as a story editor, or, a staff writer on a show.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to take a quick tangent for a second.
Sure.
You've mentioned a couple of times already what I guess some people would call. I know this term might have a bit of a negative connotation, but a gimmick script. In the sense of doing something way outside the norm, like Perspective of the Dog or the one-act play. And there was a recent blog post by Jane Espenson, and she was talking about a panel where a bunch of showrunners were talking about these types of scripts.
Oh, I was probably on it.
Okay.
It's impossible, yeah.
And I do think it's very important because people may listen to this and think, oh, I
should be doing that.
I should be doing that. I should write And I Love Lucy, or I should write something, way out in left field.
My script was still very timely. And it also, I took, when I wrote, the script from the perspective of the dog, but I took it very seriously. And it was in the same sort of format and mindset that all of the other episodes were, like the Locke episode when you learn, how he became paralyzed and all of that. It was, how the dog got to the island and what happened, and the people around him. And how that led to all of the things where he, and to the moment where he jumped over Jack, was the first thing that we saw. But that wasn't the story of the episode. The story of the episode involved the castaways and all of the different, all the stuff that would normally happen in an episode of the show. Just sort of with the dog as sort of a centerpiece. That everyone was acting around, as opposed to being a point of view where you're actually running through a forest. It wasn't really anything like that, but it was very much an episode of the show in the voice of the show. I wouldn't consider it a gimmick script. I feel like it could have been an episode of the show. I think maybe it was just the idea of the dog not being a real person would prevent that from happening, but for me, it was very much in tune with what they were doing on the show at the time. So for me, gimmick scripts are a huge risk because it sort of gives off the vibe of like maybe you don't take it seriously.
Right.
And that's a huge concern. If one of those scripts lands on my desk, if I feel like this could be an episode of the show, that's great. If I feel like they're just trying to do this to stand out, that's not really going to help them. Because it's not telling me that they can mimic the voice of the show. They're just trying to do something that was fun and outside the box and to try to get noticed. And that doesn't work. Most of the time that won't work.
Right. So be playful with the hook or the angle, but once you set in to write, it's got to feel like
these characters need to be the characters that we've come to know and love on that show, for sure. Yeah.
Great. Perfect. Okay. That answers that question. And now moving on past the 4400, then was Leverage right after that?
Yes, Leverage was right after that. I had written a pilot that was actually in a very similar vein as Leverage. It centered on a con man, and so when John Rogers read it for Leverage, he brought me into the room and basically said I couldn't have been, I think, more right for that show just because our voices were so similar and how we chose to do that that genre. Because it was very much sort of like, you know, a charming lead and just very heisty and sort of like very character rich, but also had a lot of humor in it. So I think the combination really matched. And when I read the script for Leverage, I was like, well, clearly I should be writing it for this show. So it was a great sort of marriage of how we were both thinking at the time. So it was a great experience. And John is one of the better room runners I've ever worked with. He can break down a story like nobody. And it was great to sort of to get to sit side by side with him and work through story points and sort of sequences and how to, you know, how to really sort of plot out an episode of television. Really one of the best at it. And so I mean, I've been fortunate. I've worked with so many great showrunners. And John was also really opened the door to allowing you to be a part of every aspect of the process too. You get to sit in on editing and all of that stuff. So
very cool.
It was a great experience.
And another tangent, and that is that you've mentioned in passing, you wrote a Buffy spec, you wrote this pilot. As you're writing these side scripts, I mean, is this something that you're doing all the time, or were they for very specific purposes, or?
Well, you usually want to have fresh material, because when your agents or whomever goes out with a script for the first time, I mean, there's like a half-life attached to it, where after a certain amount of time, it's just not going to feel fresh anymore, either because you wrote for a show that's no longer on the air, or, you know, you've written an original pilot that someone else has done, so it feels like you've ripped off now someone else because that show's now on the air. So you have to sort of keep generating fresh material, and you kind of have to do it on your own time. If you're on a staff of a show, you still have to sort of like, you know, devote your weekends to what's that new thing that you're going to spit out that's going to get people's attention that's different from what you've done before. Just so in the end you have sort of a wide variety of scripts that can show all the different kinds of writing you can do. Otherwise, you'll end up getting pigeonholed. I mean, and I was sort of, I think, running the risk of getting pigeonholed as a science fiction writer because I had written that Lost spec, which got me on like a slew of science fiction shows in a row. So I wanted to show people by writing this sort of con man pilot script that I was actually more equally interested in other things like, you know, like crime shows.
Very cool. So now you have Leverage on your belt, and you have that as part of your sort of portfolio.
Yes.
But you're still writing new stuff.
Still writing new stuff. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. And a very good lesson. A lot of people have the mindset, I write this and now I'm done. Yeah,
you can't just have one script as a sample. You have to have a lot of different, and unless you only want to write for one very specific kind of show, which seems like a boring outlook to me. I like to write everything. I like to write comedy, I like to write crime dramas, I like to write science fiction, I've written soap operas. So I mean, I don't want to limit myself as a writer, and I don't want to force myself into a corner by writing sample scripts that put me in a category of one genre or another. So I like to write in all different genres just to make sure I can present myself as a more complete writer to the world.
It's funny because a lot of those genres you mentioned actually play into caper, which we'll get
to. It does.
Very
yeah.
cool. So then moving on to Eureka, which is actually an interesting connection, because episode 4 of this podcast, when we were just getting started, was Jamie Paglia.
Yes, that's how we met.
That's how we met, and you actually helped me get that interview.
Because I think you asked me if I wanted to be interviewed. I'm like, no, you should probably talk to the creator of the show. He's just right over the next office, so I'll get him for you. I felt weird talking about the show when it really wasn't my voice, so I wanted you to talk to Jamie, and that was a really fun interview too. I like that one a lot. But no, Jamie again is like, you know, Jamie and Bruce Miller were the showrunners of Eureka and sort of recruited me out of Leverage to come to that show. And you know, I started season 4 And after season 3, I think they had some sort of like come to Jesus where they realized that they wanted to sort of breathe new life into the show.
Mm-hmm.
And that meant sort of refreshing the writing staff in addition to sort of idea-wise coming up with a new concept.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, I mean, season 4, it still feels like the old Eureka, but I think is more ambitious in terms of the storytelling goes. And we played more with arcs and things.
Mm-hmm. The time travel.
The time travel. Yeah. Brought in some new characters,
Yeah.
and my buddy James Callis came in, and
Yeah.
and then I brought on Will Wheaton and Felicia Day, who couldn't have been more right for the
Oh,
show. So that was like, I mean, Eureka was probably the most fun I'd ever had on a television show, and the writing staff was really like a family, and everyone was in it together for the benefit of the show. There was no politics. It was just sort of like everything was like left at the door, and we're all still so very close. And we talk about having reunions all the time from just that staff, because it was just a really great experience. Some the best human beings all on the same staff, which is just it's unusual and it's rare, and you have to cherish it when you have it, and we did, which was great.
And quite a healthy dose of nerd power going on there.
A lot of nerd power, yes. Behind this, I mean, everyone associated with that show was a genuine lover of science.
Uh-huh.
And we had a science advisor named Kevin Grazier, who also was a science advisor on Battlestar Galactica.
Wow.
But he left us alone for a lot of it, because we loved doing research ourselves.
Yeah.
We would bring him in at the beginning of each season of like to just tell us what's new in science and what sort of like emerging science that we can sort of like take for and use as a story idea. But then, we would end up, we all had subscriptions to Wired and Science and Scientific America. And like, so we were like just huge nerds and just were like consuming as much as we could. And I think that showed on the series of just sort of like, even like the stuff that we did season 4 is like coming to pass now. And like 3D printing is now a big thing. And we, there's just a lot of science. I felt like we were like a little ahead of the curve because we did so much homework on that show.
And you can 3D print a whole house now.
I know. Isn't that cool?
Oh, amazing.
I know.
I think I actually heard an interview, not with him, but that he was a part of, where they were talking about the science of Battlestar Galactica. And it fascinated me, the kind of discussions that they had. Like, well, no, the Viper couldn't turn that way. And I love that attention to detail.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people who have a little bit of a science background, and if something feels more authentic, then they buy into it more.
Absolutely. And I mean, our viewership on Eureka were by and large very intelligent human beings. And I've been to a lot of conventions where I've had actual scientists and professors come up to me afterwards and say they're huge fans of the show and appreciate how hard we try anyway to get the science right. At some point, we have to sacrifice science for story.
Yeah.
But we did our damnedest. And after we finish a script, we would sort of send the script off to Kevin Grazier, and Kevin would write these sort of like long papers in response to like, well, here's what it really would be. I would use these terms instead of that term. So, but we never had any sort of technobabble. There was no, blah, blah, blah. And we did it all ourselves, and we tried to be, we just loved doing it. I mean, there were no lazy writers on that staff. We wanted to make sure that the stories came from the science as much as from the characters. And to do that, you have to be really genuine with the facts that you're basing it on.
Wow. That is great stuff. Now, I couldn't think of a more polar opposite to Eureka. Person of interest.
Person of interest is in a way a genre show, I would think. But again, like, when you look at my sort of portfolio, as you would say, I have a lot of stuff that I've written that is perfect for a show like Person of Interest. And I have other stuff that would be perfect for a show like Eureka. I mean, Person of Interest takes itself very, very seriously, which Eureka surely does not. We had a lot more sort of fun with everything that we did on that show. But Person of Interest was also, they took science very seriously. They took technology very seriously. In the same way that we were geeks about science, they were all geeks about technology. and you know, they also have, you know, science tech consultants, I guess you would say, and they have spy consultants as well.
Wow.
So there's a lot of components that go into making that show, and you know, and Jonah is like one talented person. You know, from the Batman movies to Memento to, like, I mean, for him to come in and do a television show and it not to feel like he's just, you know, doing it as a side project. I mean, this is his baby.
Yeah.
And he made sure that everything was on point. And it was a really sort of fun show to be on set for too. I mean, Michael Emerson is like he's a dream to work with, and obviously I was a fan of him from Lost. Clearly, I watched Lost.
Oh yeah.
But it's you know, for me to be able to sort of work with him in a different context was amazing. And
he was the reason I started watching that show.
Yeah, I mean, he pulls you in like crazy,
Yeah.
and he does it on Person of Interest too.
Yeah.
Like I mean, most of the time, maybe he's talking about what he's seeing on a monitor, but damn if you're not like really attentive to what he's saying. But you know, the episode I did, I wanted to sort of throw his character for a loop, and I gave his character ecstasy through crazy, because I just wanted, you know, I wanted to see the playful version of Finch, and it turned out so well, and it was just sort of like really great to see the sort of the character step out from behind the desk and play a little bit and sort of like, you know, be a little looser than what he was, and you know, and I came onto that show halfway through the first season to sort of help them finish out the season. They got a little behind schedule, but it was just such a great experience to be able to sort of just come in and just sort of be welcome right away, and you know, I wish I could have stayed, but you know, I had sold a couple pilots, and so I had to go off and do those, and I'm still a huge fan of the show. I think it's great, and I think it's only getting better.
Mm-hmm. Very, very cool. And now, in terms of the pilots, there's a lot of people who are sort of career room people,
yes,
if I want to call it that. And then there's a lot of writers who sort of, at this stage of the career, after sort of moving up to the point where you've been involved in all the different processes, that you sort of want to be the one who's making the story. I mean, at some point, sort of, you lose sight of your own voice, because your job as a staff writer is, in large part, not just to contribute to the room, but also to mimic the voice of the showrunner of that show and the tone of that show, which may not be your own voice or even anywhere close to your own voice. So at some point you sort of need to remind yourself of what your own voice is, whether that's just writing pilot specs to sort of like, you know, put yourself through the paces, or to actually go out and pitch and develop and create a show of your own and go through that whole process, and which is, you know, can be really intimidating, but also if you are really sort of, you know, you really want to get your own voice out there, it's really the only way to do it is to go make a thing. Very cool. And so now you did shoot both pilots?
No, I shot one of them. I shot
the Gina Davis one.
The Gina Davis one. Gina Davis and Scott Bakula for TNT, and it was a great experience. She's a doll, and I want to work with her again so very quickly. And so is Scott Bakula. I mean, honestly, it was like a dream cast.
Yeah.
And it was sort of really wonderful, because it was the first time that I had, you know, something I had written had gone through all of these paces and made it through all of the hurdles that normally make it, you know, you run into when you're developing something, and to the point where we were, you know, on set in Portland making the thing, and it was just a great experience to sort of, you know, be on that side of it, to be sort of the one that people are turning to when they have all the questions and stuff, and not just sort of a cog in a machine, but more of a leader on set and creatively. It was a really great experience. I'm, you know, sad that it didn't go farther than the pilot itself, but I'm super proud of it. I think the end result was fantastic, and it just, you know, why it didn't make it, who knows? It's hard to say.
It's a bit of a crapshoot.
It's a crapshoot. I mean, and you know, they have other things that they're trying to pair it with, and so you just sort of sometimes lose out to, you know, a bigger creator name. I'm very proud of it, and I think it sort of made me a stronger person, not necessarily a stronger writer, but like a stronger presence as a creator than I was before.
Very cool, and certainly a great trial run for
a good trial
for the time
run
that you actually make it through and
for
get your own
sure.
series going.
Yeah. It was definitely sort of was the springboard for me wanting to do something like Caper too, where you just sort of get to a point in the business where you get bogged down by a lot of like too many cooks in the kitchen. There's just the process can be really it can really tense and and you sort of lose sight of why you got into this business in the first place. And I mean, it's to have fun. I mean, we get to make things for a living. Like, what better job is there than that?
Oh, yeah.
And so I really just sort of wanted to dive back in after that pilot experience and without any overseers. And I got to do that with Caper. I got to be the studio and I got to be the showrunner. And it was just to this day, I mean, it probably will be my best professional experience I've ever had.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we were going to talk about Caper at the end, but why don't we do that now?
Sure, okay.
Because Caper it's fun.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's so, I watched the first 2 episodes. I think those are the
only 2 that I've released, yeah.
And, I mean, great cast.
Yeah.
And it looks like a TV show. Obviously, you can tell that it's a kind of an indie feel to the content.
Yep.
But it looks like a TV show. Tell me about, and we were talking about this a little bit before we started, the 2 predominant places that you see web series are either as a loss leader for sort of getting like a showcase piece for the actors and director and other people who are involved. In other words, put a lot of your own money in and don't expect to get a lot out.
Right.
Or you've got these big like video game companies who are putting hundreds of thousands of dollars into these grand spectacles. This isn't either of those. Tell me about why you wanted to make Caper and how it happened.
I just really wanted to do something fun, and I wanted to do something that was mine. And making the pilot for TNT really sort of put the fire in me to sort of create. And Felicia Day and I have been friends for a very long time since I wrote a character for her in Eureka and brought her on in the show. And we've been going back and forth for the last couple of years of like when we're going to work together again and what's that thing going to be. And I just happened to have a lunch scheduled with her the day after I finished editing the pilot for TNT.
Wow.
And my friend Mike Sizemore was in sort of a confluence of crazy events, but my friend Mike Sizemore, my co-creator on Caper, was in town visiting, and he had a bunch of meetings around town, and so I just brought him along because I thought he should meet Felicia. And the night before, I was like, well, if we ever wanted to do a digital series, we're talking to Felicia tomorrow, so like,
wow,
is there anything that we we just like literally broke the story for Caper that night before the lunch, and we came into the lunch and pitched it to her, and she, by the end of the lunch, we had a show.
Wow.
And it was such a fun like way it all started, and then it just sort of steamrolled from there. And to get to be the production company and the studio behind it it was a great experience because there was there's so much involved in putting a show together, and you don't normally get to be a part of the business side of things. And I was forced to be involved in the business side of things, and I was hand delivering contracts for people to sign, which isn't something that I would normally ever do.
Wow.
But it was a great experience, and for it to be something that's yours, and the success or failure kind of rides on you, is so damn scary, but at the same time rewarding, because this is why we do the thing that we do. I mean, this is why we become writers, is to create stuff. And if you don't sort of like take the risk along with the reward, then there's no point. So I putting my name on the thing and having to be involved in every step of the process, from its inspiration all the way through the sound mixes that I'm doing this week, actually finishing up the last few episodes. It's been great. And not some people don't have it in them to be the boss. They just want to write scripts, and but I like being the person that people come to with questions. It really sort of, I feel like it's a part of the process of being a showrunner is that you need to stand up and say, this is the way it's going to be. If you don't have that, that gene, I imagine doing something like Caper is very difficult, because there are so many questions, and you end up, you're kind of the department head for every department in addition, because it's a very tiny crew, it's a very small budget. I'm buying props on Amazon like 2 days before,
Wow.
we shoot. So it's very hands-on, and it does have sort of that film school experience of like guerrilla filmmaking at its finest, where like everyone feels like they're in the foxhole together.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we had such a great. Our cast and crew were basically people that I had brought in, that I had known before from other projects, and who are just friends of mine, and people that I trust to do the job, but also to bring the personality to the table of like, I realize we're not really getting paid for this, but this is something that's going to have all of our names on it. So let's give our heart and soul to it. And every single person did.
Wow.
From the interns to, Beth and Abby and Hartley and Harry, our leads. And everyone was like so gung-ho. It was just like, it was so fun to make it.
Yeah.
And I mean, despite like, not having the money that you would normally want to try something like this, we did our damnedest to make it feel like a television show and not a web series. There's no sort of talking to a camera. It's very much shot and performed as though it was a series that would be airing on a network or a cable show. It just happens to be airing on YouTube and Hulu.
Wow. And you pulled a lot of favors to make that happen.
A ton of favors, yeah. To the point where I couldn't really do it again if I wanted to. We'd have to find a different sort of model, I think, for Caper Season 2 than we used for Caper Season 1, because I don't know that anyone can invest the time and energy and lack of income from the time that they give us. I don't think we could do it all over again. We'll have to find a different avenue to make Season 2. But I mean, I don't regret a single day from making Caper, and I don't regret a single dollar either. I think in the end, it's all worth it to just make a thing that you're proud of.
And speaking about dollars and Season 2, I know that you mentioned in a different interview that Hulu is better than YouTube. If people want to watch it, choose Hulu.
Well, it's not to choose Hulu. Hulu as a outlet that. As a platform in which Season 2 could possibly be funded, as opposed to YouTube.
Yeah.
YouTube, I mean, it keeps track of views, which is fine, but it's not going to bring in the revenue that would be necessary to make something like a Season 2. And I know that watching things on Hulu at the moment is not something people love to do because there are commercials, but those are there for a reason.
Right.
If those commercials didn't exist, I have no chance of making back the money that I put forward to make Caper in the first place. And if it does well on Hulu, who's to say that they won't want to fund a Season 2? Or the success of the model somehow inspires someone like Netflix or Amazon to fund a Season 2. So I think it's not that we prefer one platform of the other as far as showcasing the show. I think it works best on either outlet. But for us, as far as our future prospects for the show, Hulu is definitely the outlet that can sort of best reward us.
And tell me a bit about Geek and Sundry, because the distribution part of any web series is a big deal.
Yes. Well, and again, like that's one of the reasons. Like I could have made Caper on my own. I could have spent the money and just been the studio and the distribution, but I don't have a distribution model in place, and that's a big deal because it is not easy to launch anything, as we all know. And Geek and Sundry, I mean, they have great shows already. I mean, Tabletop is one of the most entertaining things you can watch on all of the web or television.
Yeah.
So they have the experience that is required to launch something, and they have the distribution outlet already in place on their website and on YouTube. And it was sort of like, obviously Felicia and I just want to do stuff together.
Yeah.
So, the marriage of, my company and Geek and Sundry to make this thing was great. I mean, it was the best, of all possible worlds. I know how to actually make the thing, and they know how to put the thing out there. And so we came together, and it just seemed like a great fit, and it just prevented me from having to worry about a whole side of the business that I know nothing about. But I've learned through the process of, some of it anyway. You can't learn everything, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, tell me a bit about what you've learned, because it must have been a transition for you to go from pretty, for all intents and purposes in this context, unlimited resources of a TV show to extremely limited resources.
Yeah. As I was telling you before, I sort of did the math just for fun of comparing the cost per minute of my TNT pilot versus the cost per minute of Caper. And it boiled down to, we spent around $125,000 per minute on the TNT pilot.
Yeah.
And about $850 per minute on Caper.
Wow.
But I'm not prouder of the TNT one. I'm super proud of Caper. So it just goes to show that it's really not the money and the resources that goes into making thing. It's sort of the the passion and the ideas behind the thing that makes it successful and not in your own heart and mind.
Yeah, it must be freeing not to have to go through the notes process.
Yes. The answer to your question is yes. Well, I mean, I think for me, like, creative freedom was one of the big reasons why I wanted to do something like that. And, there tend to be a lot of cooks in the kitchen in network and cable, and from the, the studio notes, from, network notes and, producer notes even. There's so many stages that an idea has to go through, and it's sort of like, grandmother's whispers, where it's like it changes everything through every step. It changes, and by the end of it, sometimes it turns out to be nothing even close to what you had originally intended to make.
Wow.
Whereas this, you didn't really have to worry about that. I gave it to Geek and Sundry for notes, and their notes were fantastic. They were very minimal.
Yeah.
But it was all sort of for the betterment of the process. And they watch cuts and they give notes on cuts, but like, we're all on the same team. It doesn't ever feel like, they're not trying to prove their jobs to me and I'm not trying to prove my job to them. It's like, how do we make the best thing? And it just feels like it's more of a family vibe. It's more like we're all in this together. And we're just trying to make something that, is as good as it can possibly be.
Very, very cool. And before we move on from Caper, any other thoughts about it?
Any thoughts about Caper?
Or anything that you'd want to tell the audience about?
If you don't know anything about Caper, Caper is a digital series that combines live action and animation. We do all of the live action is the alter ego stuff, and we do superhero sequences in animation. So we avoid sort of the cheesiness of having costumes and action sequences that we can't do on a budget without it looking terrible. And the show is essentially about the alter egos of a team of superheroes who turn to a life of crime to make ends meet. And it's sort of like what I like to call a character comedy. So we don't take ourselves seriously, and we hope you don't take it too seriously either, but it's just a really fun show.
Very, very cool. And as I was mentioning before, a lot of us get into this business because of the fun of it.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's not fun work, but you lose that little something that we had with our film school projects and little passion projects in the beginning. So it's cool to see that at this stage of your career, there's no reason you can't do a passion project.
Right, but sometimes you have to get to a certain place in your career to be able to pull off something like that. I mean, the only reason I could make Caper is that I could afford to take 6 months off to devote to something that wasn't necessarily going to make any money.
Right.
Had this been, the start of my career, I wouldn't necessarily be able to do that. I for sure wouldn't be able to do that. So I've been fortunate enough to find some success on the television side to be able to fund these, side projects that sort of remind us why, why we do this. It's to have fun. It's to make stuff. It's to, to be in the foxhole together. It's all of those things that we discovered when we were in film school.
Yeah. And would you be open if there was a chance to pitch this as a series?
Oh, for sure. I mean, the cast and I have already talked about it. We would love to turn this into something else. And the big joke on set was when an actor was goofing off or something that they would be left out of the movie. So Hartley, I think, is still on the out, so he might not be in the movie, but everybody else is for sure in the movie. No, everybody's in the movie. But I mean, the fact that like during production that we would be joking about these things because we want it to be something more than we can make it at the time. But like, if it's a movie or if it's a TV show, we would all love to do it.
You never know.
Yeah, who knows?
You never know. Very, very cool. And so moving on, the last section was going to be the third, but it's now the last. Is now that you have all of this body of experience, last however many years, lots of different TV shows, lots of different staffs, you see people who are now coming into the industry, who want to break in. What would you say to those people? And it could be anybody. I'm not saying necessarily this stereotypical person who's doing it wrong.
Yeah.
But somebody who's maybe a writing assistant now, or just an assistant and wants to get ahead, or maybe trying to get an assistant job. What would you say to them as things you wish you would have known in the beginning?
Well, it's tough because I got lucky really fast, but I think my biggest piece of advice would be don't wait for something to happen to you. Like, don't count on your talent to be the thing that gets noticed. Sometimes you have to be noticed first. And you can do that by getting an assistant job, getting on a show, getting on, working on the studio side or the network side of things, and really showing them what you can do and what kind of person you are. I mean, like on Eureka, we met people at Comic-Con that then became interns, that then became, our, script coordinator, because we appreciated the passion for the show and the willingness to do anything that was required to get started. You can't be afraid to get coffee for people. I mean, there's things that you're just going to have to suck up. You may be the best writer in all of the land, but if you're not willing to go get a latte for a producer, then you're not going to get very far. You have to get in the door, and a lot of times the scripts just don't do that anymore. You have to find some other way of presenting yourself and showing people your willingness to work hard, and not just be talented. It's just not enough anymore, and it's just so hard for a script to land on the table of the right person at the right time. You can't just sort of hope and wait and submit to festivals and hope things happen from that. You really need to sort of dig in. And you have to write. Like, don't write one thing and think that's going to be the thing that's good enough. You have to keep writing. You have to write a bunch of things. I would recommend having 3 or 4 samples that you can submit, to different kinds of shows. So it's not just like, I only write genre, so you can't submit it to Bones or something. Like, you need to sort of have a breadth of material to be able to show people. But yeah, I mean, just write. Don't stop. Just keep doing it. Never be satisfied and never think you've learned enough. Because you haven't. I haven't. I'm still learning things every day. And if you think you've there's nothing left to learn, then you're not going to go very far.
Very, very cool. Well, I think that is a perfect place to end up. And I really thank you for your time. And people don't know, we actually had a few false starts to this as well. Practice runs. So I appreciate so much you taking this time. And wow, I really hope you get your own shows off the ground, because I'm convinced that they're going to be stuff that I'm going to love.
Oh, thanks, Greg. But it's probably because of these things and less me. But I get, no, it's fine. I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very cool.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Cool. Some helpful links from this episode. Follow Amy Berg on Twitter @Bergopolis. Follow me on Twitter @GrayJones is my handle. You can find Geek and Sundry with bonus content for Caper at geekandsundry.com. And of course, visit tvwriterpodcast.com for tons of resources, including a TV Writer Twitter database with over 1,000 writers, links to hundreds of free TV scripts, pilots, and Bibles. You can find the audio-only versions of this podcast through the Script Magazine iTunes feed. You can also find the video version at plenty of places: iTunes, blip.tv, YouTube, tvwriterpodcast.com, and of course at scriptmag.com. I want to thank this week's sponsors: Script Anatomy, Feature and TV script consultations at scriptanatomy.com. Rode microphones at rodemic.com. Think Tank, camera bags and accessories at thinktankphoto.com. Indie System, affordable US-made camera support gear at indiesystem.com. Red Giant software effects plugins at redgiant.com. Elgato, makers of ITV computer-based DVRs at elgato.com. Total Training, thousands of hours of online training at totaltraining.com. For information on how you can advertise your product, service, or yourself for as little as $30, visit tvwriterpodcast.com and click on Advertise. Thanks for joining me. Look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye. Hosted by Gray Jones, the TV Writer Podcast is brought to you by Script Magazine and ScriptMag.com, the leading source for script writing information in print and on the web.